ahead and get started.
ACA codifications.
All right.
Okay.
Kelly, are you good?
That was enough.
Okay, there we go. All right. Oh, the gavel moved. I'm not used to this. Shift this over. Oh, it's heavier than I thought. Okay. All right. The House Ethics and Oversight Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Byrnes.
Here.
Representatives Hope.
Here.
Breen.
Present.
Churches.
Present.
Hoskins.
Here.
Wegela.
Here.
Kunse.
Here.
Wozniak. Harris.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 8 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you so much. All right, Representative Hope moves to adopt the meeting minutes from May 18th of 2023. There being no objection, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. Welcome everyone to today's meeting. Today at our committee meeting, we will have a virtual presentation from Talise Murray, who is the National Field Organizer for Declaration for American Democracy. And Ms. Murray will speak on the organization's campaign finance and dark money reform recommendations. As always, following the presentation, we will have time for each member to ask at least one question. And so folks can feel free to jot down their thoughts and just give me or our clerk staff a wave if they have a question to ask. So at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Murray for our virtual presentation. There we go.
Am I? Yes. Hi, thank you, Representative Byrnes, for inviting me to speak with you in the committee on the issue of campaign finance reform. I'm not sure, am I able to share my screen, or does that need to come from the clerk's team?
Okay. Yes, we'd like for you to share your screen, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Perfect.
Are you all able to see this?
Yes.
So I just want to start off by, I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen for a moment until we get to the research side, but I just wanted to make sure it works. So I want to start off by really talking about the importance of campaign finance reform and setting the scene for where we are in Michigan in comparison to the rest of the country. I have here my colleague Kate, who is a student in Michigan, and we'll also talk for a brief moment about her experience throughout the last few years in the field. So a little bit about Declaration for American Democracy. We are a coalition made up of over 260 state and national partners, all dedicated to democracy and campaign finance reform. But before I was here, I was the deputy director for Promote the Vote 2022, a member of Secretary Benson's inaugural Collegiate Advisory Task Force, a student at Michigan State, a high school student in Bloomfield Hills, and I was raised on the east side of Detroit. So my passion and experience for Michigan runs deep and spans across the state. As for election reform, I've lived across the state and I've worked for nearly 10 years in this state in almost every one of our regions. And I can say Michiganders, in comparison to the rest of the country, are some of the most motivated, engaged, and ready for change citizens that we have. But I also, on a regular basis, like I'm sure all of you, will hear comments like, does it really matter? Often in response, we talk about how we all have the friends who are elected by less than 10 votes, or the member of Congress who's in office by 500 votes. Of course, we have the historic bills that pass by 1 vote margin, showing yes, everyone's vote matter. But while votes are the final deciding factor, we know that big money helps set the tone. It influences who our voters view. It influences who they can see. And it unfortunately impacts the policy platforms of many of those that run for office. That's why today I'm talking to you about bringing Michigan from the 40th position in the country to increase our policies around money in politics and building a more equitable, accessible, and transparent system. Throughout the presentation, I will talk to you a little bit about a recent poll that DFAD and GQR conducted in Michigan, where it shows that over 75% of Michiganders believe that big and secret money has too large of an influence on our elections, and they are more likely to trust an elected official whose money comes from small donors. And I would be remiss not to mention that this was a bipartisan and age diverse poll. That's the mindset of every Michigander. And at this place where I asked you all to come from when we have this conversation about future legislation, that Michiganders want money out of politics, but our campaign finance laws isn't designed to enable everyday Michiganders to run for office or feel like they have a say in our system. So I want to, just give a couple facts, and then we'll move over into some policy recommendations, some of which you all have been provided in previous conversations. And I want to walk through why it's important to do it right now. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can all see some polling together. So when we asked, and this poll was conducted throughout March and April of this year, when we asked Michiganders, how concerned would you say about the influence of wealthy donors in our state politics? We came in with 87% were concerned, with 41% were very concerned, right? We only have a total of 13% who were saying they weren't concerned at all. And this was before any negative or positive messaging was provided. It was just a simple question that was submitted to our members. One moment, I think the system is freezing. One second. I'm gonna download it so it's a better file. I apologize for this.
And Ms. Murray, take your time. We also do have printed copies of the presentation. So if you're able to share your screen, that's fabulous. But if you're having some tech difficulties, we understand, and we can also follow along on paper.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, so I'm gonna try this one other thing, and then if not, we will just continue and then talk a little bit about the polling and then move on with some of the recommendations. We just have one other thing that we're able to try. I was able to send it to Brooke in a different mechanism.
Okay, we can just pause for a minute while we're working out the tech glitches.
Okay. Yes, okay, so that should work. We should be able to open it. Yes. And then Zoom. Okay.
There we go. Looks good.
And then this was a poll that was done in 2022 that I think is always really interesting to talk about, because Michigan ranked 9th in the country for the most PAC donations. And we oftentimes see that in states where we don't have high voter turnout, there's not high voter registration, and there's not a lot of engagement. But we know that's not true in Michigan. We are a state where people will plan a protest or a rally on 24 hours notice for issues across the board. We have in the last 5 years seen increased voter registration and voter turnout to levels beyond what we can imagine. I remember in 2020 at the primary, we had college students at the polls until 2 a.m. This is a state where people care and people are passionate. But for some reason, we're only 16th in the nation for individual donations. And when we see that, that usually tells us that our systems, the state that has that, the systems are not designed to encourage individual donations. Because normally, if you are ranked higher for PACs, you have lower turnout. Michigan is one of 2 states that doesn't have that, doesn't follow that trend. In 2018, across the board for both parties, we came across a very sad moment in Michigan history where for the first time, secret money outspent the donations of regular voters by a 2-to-1 ratio. So by PACs, corporation, and 527 accounts, there were more than double the amount of money. And so some of the bills that I had the pleasure of talking to you all about, and that I'm going to talk about here today, directly addresses that problem. And then the other side, in Michigan, we have the term limits, right? We are one of the most regulated term limited bodies in the country. And so what that means is we move throughout offices at a high pace. You know, we currently have 2 people running for mayoral office. So what that means is not only are our legislative and executive offices really expensive, but it influences the cost of our local and city elections as well. And we started to see this influence in 2020 when 9 seats cost over $1 million. That means that there were 9 seats in the House that cost $13 million alone. We have people who run state, congressional campaigns in other parts of the country, albeit with a cheaper market, I understand, who costs less than that. And now I hear people running for school board or city council being told that they have to raise 6 figures. We are keeping regular everyday people out of office because of how much we allow secret money and big money to influence the cost and the pace of our elections. And the second half of what we're going to talk about is Citizens United and Citizens United. So the states in orange are the states that have already overturned Citizens United. And so in the last 3 weeks, what we've done here at DFAT is we conducted some polling in our state here of people and getting them engaged as to why they want to overturn Citizens United. And we've had responses from every single region of the state, all talking about why they believe that Citizens United should be overturned and why it's damaging to the state. Of which I will be sending after this 20 responses representing various regions, just to kind of show how passionate people are. But the ages range from 18-year-olds who have never had a chance to vote in an election, but are seeing the impacts as they're learning about Citizens United in their first college class, to 65-year-olds and 70-year-olds who remember what it was to go through the Civil Rights Act, who got those rights and then felt the change after Citizens United was implemented, and are talking about how important it is to overturn it and what that does, what the impact of financial transparency has on their lives. And it's really important to recognize that the states that have overturned it are not just blue states or red states. It is a diverse set of states, and it's been happening ever since the case was done. And this originally was brought up in 2017, which I'll talk a little bit more here in Michigan. And then there's the 3 aspects of our bill recommendations for campaign finance reform. There's original source disclosure, increasing transparency, and small donor matching. Now, I've had the opportunity to talk with a few of you of some other bills, and I'll also, continue those conversations. But these are the 3 that we and our policy experts have been able to identify as the bills that would put Michigan on the path from coming from 40th back up into the top 10 around campaign finance reform laws. So I'm going to take a moment to really focus and talk a little bit more about those policies. So at the root of all the problems that we have here is the 2010 Supreme Court ruling, Citizens United. This allowed for an unlimited amount of funds to be used in our political campaigns. And so this conversation is not new here in Michigan. We have long understood the importance of reducing big money and increasing the power of the people. Right. In 2017, then Representative Moss introduced a bill for Michigan to support a constitutional amendment and overturning the ruling set in Citizens United. Doing so would have Michigan join a bipartisan set of groups, including West Virginia, Montana, and Alaska, as well as California and Oregon. Today, I call on members to not only identify a sponsor, but to work with now Senator Moss, who has committed to reintroducing legislation to overturn Citizens United, so that we can have a joint House and Senate introduction this term. This timeline is important as it will send a powerful message to voters and the rest of the country that Michigan understands the injustice and unequal access that our political system has as a result of Citizens United. Michigan is known for setting the tone for the nation, and we have the opportunity not only to benefit Michiganders, but Americans. And we should go into 2024 with our primary, with our general election, with a clear message and with clear goals of making a more equitable system. Now, as I've told many of you, we understand that Citizens United is a long game, which is like 12 years in the making, and Michigan voters need change now. So I'm going to walk over the 3 bills that I've talked about, talk about why those are important, and then what that might look like here in Michigan. So starting with the original source disclosure, this bill aims to increase transparency by requiring disclosure of true sources behind the money. It does not change the money that you are allowed or not allowed to receive, but it also gives donors more agency in how they want their contributions spent. The 2 key provisions of the bill is any entity acting as a conduit must disclose the true original source. And the reason for this is in the last few years, as we've started to do more and more research into these, pop-up PACs and 527 accounts and all these things, we've noticed something in corporations and the pop-up super PACs. When you follow the money, 4 or 5 bodies removed, there's been a disturbing trend. We've started to see that there are international folks involved in our elections. We've started to see that there are the same 5 people in charge of and the key donors for 10, 15, 20 organizations. And so by allowing people to see who the true original source is, it allows us to be able to understand who is influencing our elections. And an initial report also would be required, as well as subsequent reports containing disclosure of the true source and the recipient who received the money throughout each step of the process. It gives the public a deeper understanding of the working of the political process, but also allows everyone to be able to track what's happening. A model legislation was passed in 2022 in Arizona by ballot referendum by over 72%. This shows that in a place like Michigan that's purple, that can flip every election, it is tenable, it is popular, and it's bipartisan. I will also be sending a copy of this bill to each of you after this. Increasing transparency in our elections is a topic where many of you have expressed interest in being open to further discussions, on both sides of the aisle. Transparency is happening. Transparent is the least that we can give voters and the thing that they express the most concern about. I have heard some really concerning stories from people here on this committee of the attacks and tactics that you had during your own elections and your inability to determine where they came from because of the lack of transparency laws here that we have. Transparency for digital campaign ads aims to update the definition of an election ad to include all mediums, as well as ensure that digital campaign ads are available in an online archive. So trust me, I understand that digital ads play a large role in an election. I remember having to run them for Promote the Vote. However, in recent years, we've seen a rise of ads being run by unidentifiable bodies, right? I don't know if anyone remember the time before, Friends of Aaron Byrnes or Americans for Puppies. That was not always the case here. We did not always have unidentified bodies running campaigns. And so we want to make sure that we are able to hold people accountable. And it's impossible to measure the amount of money spent in this area when pop-up PACs and organizations are able to do things without disclosure or transparency. You will also be sent a model bill modeled off of what is possible in Michigan from the Campaign Legal Center, a DFAC coalition member who is dedicated to helping any legislator member who wants to draft policy around transparency. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about public financing. Now, I know I've talked to some of you. I know this is a long game. And every time I mention money, we all get a little nervous. I've already asked everyone for a lot of money for Promote the Vote, so I understand. But this policy is one of the key ways to not only increase transparency, but increase an equitable public donation system. And it works to address the previously noted stat that over 40% of the donations that we had came from PACs alone, and less than 20% came from Michigan voters. That number is even smaller when we look at people who were making under a certain number. So it's not representative of our everyday Michigander. Small donor matching programs or voucher programs are designed to increase the diversity of political donors and overall political participation. When voters hear that it takes 6 figures to run for office, like we were talking about, and millions to run for Congress, like my old boss who has the most expensive seat in the Midwest, It's easy to believe that their $20 that they can give you out of their $30,000 annual salary doesn't matter. But small donor funds and matching programs fundamentally changes how candidates run for office, enabling them to competitively run and campaign by spending time with their constituents. It allows a larger pool of everyday Michiganders to believe that they can too run for office. There's 3 different ways that we talk about public financing. There's one that was been referred to the Committee on Tax Policy, which is a tax rebate. Then we also have the voucher program, which sends a voucher from the Secretary of State or whatever designate body. It sends them a voucher, and it can be, you know, 5 $10 vouchers or 2 $20 vouchers. And people are able to use that to donate to whichever candidate at whatever level they choose. Right. So they're not having to come out of their pocket when they don't make a whole lot, when inflation is through the roof, when this Byrnes, when I came home and bought an obscene amount, cost me $4. They can still engage in the process and stuff like they're important, even if they don't make the $200,000. Then also the donor matching, which in New York recently passed the 1 to 6. So if I gave $10 to Aaron, I'm picking on you because you're the chair. If I gave $10 to Aaron, Aaron would actually get $70 because it's a 1 to 6 matching. So then it incentivizes you to come talk to your constituents because you are able to actually make a certain amount of money. I've heard from elected officials, right? Some people are in districts like where I went to high school, Bloomfield Hills, where they're lucky that their constituents make a certain amount of money. But there are some members who are in some of our poorer cities in Michigan. And so they can't go, they lose money when they're running fundraisers. And so we want to incentivize them going back home and talking to their constituents rather than having these big banquets and these big fundraisers for corporations and PACs. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the money aspect of it, right? Because I said 1 to 6, and that's $60 that Michigan has to give. And Talisa is already asking you guys to give $200 million for Promote the Vote. So I did some more research on public financing and who is going to pay for it. Because we know everyday folks do not want to raise taxes, and I know none of you want to raise taxes. But there is a viable option. There's a couple. In recent polling that we did, we were able to show there was significant bipartisan support with over 65% support showing for using the money that we gain from companies, that the penalties that they get after breaking the law. Or there was also 57% support for using funds that we get from when PACs or lobbyists register in the state of Michigan. I will also be sending each of you sample legislation from Florida and Maryland to show not only the bipartisan nature of the bills, but also how they will be modeled differently for each state. We also have experts from the Brennan Center, Public Citizen, and the Campaign Legal Center who's ready to work with all of you to modify bills to make it make more sense for Michigan. Now, before I wrap up, I want to say why now, right? We have another year and a half in this term. You know, why not do it closer to the election? Why not do it, when we know what's happening? Well, the reason is 3 parts. 1, accountability. When we pass a bill, even though they don't immediately go into effect, we are able to hold ourselves and others accountable. When we say we voted on this, we're going to hold this up, and it creates more of a trust in the system for our voters. We know that political apathy is at an all-time high. Being able to have a conversation with voters on a regular basis about a recommitment to transparency, a recommitment to them and being included in the process just might bring them back to the ballot booth. It just might encourage them to come back and re-engage. 2, this is not a topic that everyday Michiganders know a whole lot about, right? They know that there's big money. They know that DTE is doing a whole lot, but they don't really understand it, right? And so one of the big things that organizations such as myself, such as VNP, have been committed to doing is educating the public. But one of the things that makes it easier for us to be able to educate the public around the importance and support you all is when we know we have a path forward, when we know what bills we're talking about, and when we have time. If we pass these bills months before the election, we are not going to have time to educate folks on the impact that these bills have, because we'll be doing ballot chase, because we will be doing turn out the vote, because we will be doing voter registration. We need to separate the two so that we have time to adequately educate people on the impact of these bills. And 3, some of these takes time to put into place. Even once we pass them, they're going to have to go through systems. And so passing them now, allowing for the summer for everyone to have that time to go through and see what the systems are going to need to change as we're looking at what these bills might do, allows us to have a quicker turnaround when it's finally time for those bills to be implemented. By waiting to pass them next year, we're just putting off the eventual implementation time by another year. And Michiganders deserve to have access now. But I don't just come here telling you, like, here's all these problems and ask and saying this. I come here with an open offer for help. So DFAD has numerous resources available to any member, regardless of party of the Michigan legislature, to help draft, introduce, and pass legislation on campaign finance reform. As I mentioned, we are over 260 members of a coalition. And so we have legal experts, we have policy experts, as well as members of our coalition that are dedicated to every issue area. So if you're looking at, how does this bill impact the environment? How does it impact housing? How does it impact racial justice? We are able to connect you not only to ourselves, but to other experts in that field. We're able to help on organizing public education forums, able to provide research and policy guidance, to connect you with legislators from other states that have recently passed these bills. In conversation with many of you, we've talked about, we've provided comments, we are committed to being here. My attendance here today, my conversations with all of you is what I see as the beginning of our commitment in helping to pass campaign finance reform here in Michigan. And our resources are your resources to make it a more equitable campaign finance system here in Michigan. To make progress on anything, I'm the democracy person, right? So I'm always going to talk about voting and campaign finance. But in order to make progress on criminal justice reform, on racial justice reform, on any of these issues, we have to first understand the promise of our democracy to ensure everyone's voice is heard and represented. And in order to do that, the dominance of big corporations and big money has to end in our politics. So now, as Chair Byrnes mentioned, I am here to stop talking to you and answer any questions you may have, to provide any additional resources, and to continue the conversation with some of you on the bills that we've already been in communication about.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Thank you so much for your presentation and all of that information today. I'll kick us off maybe with the first question, and then I think we have a few other folks who have some questions for you as well. So I wanted to start by circling back to one of the policy components under the transparency for digital campaign ads. I know you mentioned, obviously having the sponsors clearly identified, and then you also referenced those ads being available in an online archive. So in states that have enacted a measure like this one, where does that online archive typically live? Would that be like under the Secretary of State's website, or what does that tend to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's obviously an array of places, but the most common, and I always say the easiest, is the Secretary of State office has typically been the place that housed them the most. One, because it's by nature a nonpartisan entity. And we've also seen one state did Lara, which was an interesting choice, but it stands there, it's there. And then it allows people to file them from both, all of your campaigns, but also if I was to decide to do a campaign ad, that way it's not being housed inside of a political entity. So the most common and the simplest process is typically the Secretary of State's office.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Our next question will go to Representative Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for being here. You've made some fantastic points, and I just want to kind of follow up with you on a couple of those. And looking at this first page of your presentation, how concerned are you about corruption in politics and elections? And I think that's why we're all here on this committee, and I think across the aisle, we all have a lot of the same concerns. However, I'm curious and would like your feedback. So in March, we introduced a 12-bill package on transparency here in Michigan because the voters have asked for it, right? And this would help put us in compliance with Prop 1 that passed, And we still have yet to hear anything or see any action from anybody else. And, here we are rolling with this, and we're trying to get this out so Michiganders can have their transparency they're asking for. Have you looked at any of that 12-bill package at all? I'm just curious your feedback on it.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I was working on Prop 2. So the implementation of all the props has been something, a very special place for me. And the bills that we are proposing, as well as, I would be remiss not to mention the bill that you introduced, Representative Harris, they all value add to the 12 bills that we have. They all fill in gaps that we have, or they all fill in what we consider equity concerns. So the bills that we're representing are in addition to, not in, kind of contrast. The bill that you submitted actually brings Michigan outside of a horrible statistic of being one of only 2 states and the only one with a full-time legislature that does not require personal financial disclosures of lawmakers. So that bill of yours actually does fill that gap. And so all of the bills that we're recommending and the ones that I've been working with some other members of the committee here are to fill those gaps and to continue to move us forward. So we're not asking for or, we're asking for those and.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. And we look forward to continuing to discuss all forms of legislation that members of the committee are interested in as we move forward. And Representative Kunse, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Murray, did I understand you're going to send us some of these bills?
Oh, I'm going to send you all the bills.
Great. No, because I wanted your email address for the correspondence. So that was kind of my question there. To follow up on Representative Harris' question, he's not asking either or. We introduced these bills in March. Can you help us move them forward? We can't get a hearing on them.
Oh, yes, please. I would love to talk to you all about what I can do to support and help.
How can you help us get these moving?
You said what?
How can you help us get these moving?
Absolutely. So there's a couple things, right? So one thing that we know when it comes to, moving bills is a lot of public pressure. So we have, as I mentioned, 260 organizations that we work with. About 200 of them have membership here in the state of Michigan, including Michigan-based organizations. We represent, we have folks in every single city in the state of Michigan, last time I checked. So we are able to mobilize our coalition and our volunteers to calling their members, to engaging letters to the editor. I am always happy to, continue conversations that I have had with other members with leadership on the timelines of these bills, making for more recommendations. Whatever, essentially whatever you see is helpful, we are able to start mobilizing. And we are able to mobilize pretty quickly with the size of our coalition.
Great. I look forward to corresponding with you on that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. And I will note, certainly the role of this committee, and in my position as well, is to advance good legislation across the board. And we will be doing that. And I look forward to having that conversation with members as we move forward. And Ms. Murray, we will loop you in as well. So we appreciate your commitment to that process very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members who have questions? Okay. Going once, going twice. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Representative Wegela.
I just want to make a comment. Thank you for your work and your presentation today. I think, and I don't think not the only one on this committee that feels this way, but I think in general, overturning Citizens United is the single most important thing to protecting democracy. And I think we should use any tool that we have at the state level to encourage that, and then also anything we can do outside of the bounds of that to get our campaign finance system under control, because it is out of control in the state of Michigan. My question, I was just curious, New York small donor matching system, how much has that cost New York? And I know earlier you mentioned that no one here wants to raise taxes. I will say, myself, speaking only for me, I would think we should raise taxes on the wealthy here in Michigan. But anyway, that being said, how much does it cost for New York to implement that program?
Absolutely. So, New York passed the bill originally in 2019 for implementation by 2024. So this past May, it was in their state budget. So what we have, the cost that we have right now is only the cost of setting up the system. They have not yet actually done a matching program yet. That will be for the first time will be for the 2024 election. And so they are still trying to finalize exactly how much they're anticipating for that. So we do have the numbers, and I can check again. It's been a minute since I looked at the full budget, but it is just for setting up the systems inside of the Secretary of State's office to be able to send out and track the small donor matching. Yeah, it was passed, but it was kind of a delayed passing implementation process.
Thank you. I think we'll all be watching that pretty closely. I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hoskins, please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. And I actually, just to follow up to that question, just not so much for New York, but for any of the other states, jurisdictions that have also done the matching. Is there any kind of data just for the cost, just how much has cost any of those states for to implement this, and as well as it's been going through?
As well as, I'm sorry, I missed the last part of that question.
As well as if it's gone through, how much has it cost the state? If there's any data on that as well, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, what I can do is I have there's a chart that we use to keep track of all the spending that around these programs. So what I can do is I can actually send everyone the chart so that you have all the jurisdictions broken into if it's the voucher program or the small donor matching program for the cost.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rep. Hoskins. Any other questions? All right, seeing no other questions, Ms. Murray, thank you so much again for your presentation. We will absolutely be staying in touch with you. We really value your expertise. Thank you so much for your time today. And again, we will be in touch, and we look forward to working with you moving forward.
I do have one question.
Sure.
The member who asked about supporting moving the package forward, what is the best contact information for your office?
So let's, we'll follow up on that. Yeah, this really isn't the space, I think, for that conversation. Thank you.
I'm fine to share it.
Thank you. We appreciate it. We'll follow up, Ms. Murray. Thank you. We appreciate it. We'll get you that information, and we'll also make sure that all members of the committee have your contact info as well. I know you've met with several members already and have had some conversations, which we really appreciate. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thanks again for your time. All right. So at this time, our presentation has wrapped up. Representative Hoskins will move to excuse our absent member for today. There being no objection, the motion will prevail by unanimous consent, and there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you all so much.